So when looking at the broader show itself, Doctor Who likes to go into the past quite a lot. But for a significant period of time, they just stopped doing that. Before The Visitation, the previous historical serial was City of Death. But since that wasn't entirely set in the past, the previous before that was Horror Fang Rock in 1977. So The Visitation does this, but obviously puts a Doctor Who spin on it. And I will say it is a very interesting part of the history of the show. So, this was the second of the season to be created, right after Fort of Doomsday and before Kinder, making sure that the cast would get along well and so that Peter Davison could ease into the role. This story was released in 4 parts, from the 15th of February 1982 to the 23rd of February 1982. This was written by the co-script editor Eric Saywood, directed by Peter Moffat, produced by JNT, and the script editor was Anthony Root. Before jumping into part 1, I'm going to correct myself on a mistake I made in my last video. So in my Kinder review, I create theories on why Nyssa is not in the story, and what happened to her at the end of Fort of Doomsday. But that was before I listened to the Big Finish story, Primeval. So it is revealed that a Trakanite god is using her as bait so he can lure the Doctor in and take over the source of Traken, before it had a keeper. However, this retcon still doesn't excuse the lazy writing of Kinder and Fort of Doomsday, and how we don't get an explanation on screen. Also, The Visitation is directly set after Kinder, as the characters are reminiscing on the events of that story, and this is where you can tell that they filmed that before, as Tegan pronounces Mara as Mara. This means that Fort Doomsday, Kinder, and The Visitation happen back to back to back, with no wiggle room for any potential spin-offs. Another thing to mention is that the first couple of minutes show this rich family enjoying some dinner in this manor, and they see a comet fly and crash near them. Eventually, a creature from the comet invades the manor and is killed, but an android shows up and kills all the family. This is a very early example of a cold open in Doctor Who, and I think it works quite well for the story. So anyway, the Doctor and Adric poorly fly the TARDIS back to Heathrow to finally drop Tegan off at work, and while this happens, Nyssa hugs Tegan, confirming Tissa is canon. But when the TARDIS lands, they are actually a couple hundred years too early, 1666 to be precise, on what we learn later in the story. Now, one major thing I noticed on this rewatch, primarily on the Blu-ray, is how good this story looks on location. Now, I didn't mention it in my Castrovalva review, but any scene at the beginning of the story, or where they're wandering around the woods near Castrovalva, were presumably shot on film, so it looks so good. But since the majority of this story is shot on film, it just looks so crisp and the quality is so detailed that it makes me wish that more of the show was done like this. See Spearhead from Space, for example. Anyways, the group explores outside where an angry bunch of villagers get angry at them and begins to chase them around. This leads to a rare fight scene and our characters move on. Then we get to this iconic scene where Adric appears to trip over nothing.
Ah! Are you alright?
I don't know. There's nothing broken. Can you stand?
I'll try.
Lean on me.
I'll be all right in a minute.
We may not have a minute.
Can I be of any assistance?
So, up on the tree there is our main supporting character, Richard Mace, who used to be a thespian, but now has turned to a highwayman, and he is able to deliver some exposition on what has happened, as he leads the TARDIS team to an abandoned barn. So, we find out about there has been this plague, and the villagers are being extremely xenophobic to any strangers, out of fear that they'll catch this plague. But this plague has only shown up after the comet from the beginning arrived. We also see that Mace has this strange necklace made of material that is part of this bracelet used on prison planets, keeping prisoners in check. Eventually, the TARDIS team and Mace go and explore the manor from the beginning of the story, empty after the owners were killed. As this happens, a miller rides past, which confuses them as he seems to be the only person allowed to go in and out of town. The Doctor and Nyssa are able to break into the manor and eventually open the locked front door, but before the Doctor discovers this strange staircase that leads to a dead end, and when the full team goes there, he has vanished, as they are locked in by an android from the cliffhanger. Part 2 starts with the Doctor revealing that the wall is an illusion and can be bypassed as they enter the cellar full of rats. And then this happens.
No! Nissa, get out of here!
What about Tegan?
Just get out of here!
Another thing before this fight is that there's this strange device emitting soliton gas, which is toxic towards humans and is highly flammable, and the Doctor, Nissa, and Mace are able to threaten to blow up everything with it, and that's why they escape. Also, this android is wearing this Grim Reaper disguise, which is used to terrorize the villagers to do its bidding. Tegan and Adric are dragged to this hidden room where we meet our main villain, the Pteroleptal, primarily their leader. So to save time on what happens later, the Pteroleptals are this fish-looking race known for their love of beauty and art, but also of war. And basically the comet was a Pteroleptal ship stolen by Pteroleptal prisoners, who were on the Tinclavic mines of Raga, an infamously harsh prison for war criminals, which has physically scarred the leader. So 4 Pteroleptals and this android they reprogrammed escaped and crash-landed, but unfortunately one was killed, which we saw at the beginning, and the other 2 are off in their new headquarters in London. Their plan is to use rats and infect them with this artificial plague so that they can be the sole rulers of Earth. This is a very basic plot, but I do like how these guys are not ordinary, as it adds a bit of a different spin to their characters. Also, they breathe the soliton gas, and that's why it is everywhere, as they can barely live without it. Another thing is that when Eric Saywood commissioned this script for the previous season, it was declined as it was too similar to an earlier story, being The Talons of Wang Chiang. And even when this script is adjusted, I can still see the similarities, primarily on the villain, where the Pteroleptals and Magnus Greel are both war criminals who are in historical England terrorizing the locals, except this story doesn't have racist and stereotypical depictions of the Chinese though. Back to the story, the Pteroleptal is torturing Tegan and Adric, as they are clearly not of this time, and how did they get here? Back to the others, they have found the crashed spaceship and a bunch of mind-controlled humans to ambush them, and they narrowly escape into the woods, where the Doctor sends Nissa back to the TARDIS to create a sonic booster to destroy the android. Mace and the Doctor, however, want to investigate the miller, and for Mace's case, he just wants his horse. While this happens, Adric and Tegan are able to escape their prison cell, but Tegan gets recaptured as Adric is able to run free outside the manor. The Doctor and Mace soon discover that the miller is mind-controlled and that all the other villagers rush in, ready to behead them all for the cliffhanger. So, part 3 begins off with this execution being called off, as the Pteroleptal wants them alive. Primarily the Doctor, obviously, and shortly afterwards the Doctor and Mace are able to disable the bracelet of the man who saved them, but it doesn't help in their capture. This is also the episode with all of the Pteroleptal backstory, so I won't cover it again. Adric is able to get back into the TARDIS and find Nissa, and he explains that what is happening, but since he is useless and can't build a sonic booster, he ends up leaving almost as fast as he got in. And right after he leaves, he gets immediately jumped by villagers. As the Doctor is imprisoned, Mace and Tegan have bracelets put on them, as they are brainwashed to carry materials, mostly likely parts of artificial plague, to the miller to go on to London with the other Pteroleptals. This is also the 4th story in a row where a companion is helping the villain in some way, and now I think it is getting really boring. For Castra Valva, Adric is forced to help the Master by trapping the Doctor inside of the city, but I think that worked as he was captured the entire time. For Forward to Doomsday, Adric obviously helps the Urbankins because he's stupid, and Nissa gets temporarily mind-controlled. And obviously for Kinder, Tegan is controlled by the Mara for a short period of time. It is quite obvious that having 3 companions, and usually 1 main supporting character, is quite hard to juggle around for them to do stuff evenly. And, as it is extremely obvious that something needs to change really soon. Speaking of big changes, this scene then happens.
Shoot him if he moves. Now, turn around. Drop the sonic device.
Isn't my day, is it? I feel as though you've just killed an old friend.
Killed an old friend indeed, Doctor, as this is the most integral part of the story. Ever since Fury from the Deep, the sonic screwdriver became one of the Doctor's most useful tools, primarily to get out of situations, but unfortunately, this is its final appearance in the classic show, as it won't appear until the TV movie and the revival in 2005. This is because JNT and Eric Saywood disliked the idea of this device that acted like a Deus Ex Machina and could get out of any situation, as it made the threats too easy. I personally disagree with this, as most threats he can't even use it against, and I believe it is quite unfair just destroying it here. But I still see their side of the argument, and it arguably makes the show more intense and more exciting without. So this episode ends with the Pteroleptal leader leaving to London, as it forces the brainwashed Tegan to open the cage with the plague-induced rats. For the final episode, I will just say this is a quite action-packed and easily the best of the four. So, instantly, the Doctor is able to stop Tegan and Mace from killing him by destroying their bracelets. Then we see the android dressed as the Grim Reaper, scaring the villagers with Adric as it makes its way to the TARDIS. But Adric attempts to fight it off after he sees Nyssa inside, but he fails miserably. The android makes its way inside where Nyssa activates the sonic booster and blows it up, completing this side plot. Back to the others, the Doctor uses one of Mace's pistols to shoot the lock out of the door, but he misses, yet it still works somehow. But I do find it quite funny seeing the Doctor wield a gun so casually, even though if this was the Mon series, he probably would have a heart attack. After taking out the guard by pushing boxes onto him, the Doctor, Tegan and Mace find out that the main headquarters are in London, but they can't seem to escape the manor. So Adric and Nyssa come to the rescue by poorly materializing the TARDIS inside the manor, and finally rescuing them by hitting the console very hardly. So the Doctor uses this scanner for strong electrical signals, and he tracks down where the Pteroleptals are at London. So then they enter this bakery and find the headquarters with now 2 extra Pteroleptals inside, starting this fight.
No!
I will say, Tegan bashing one of the Pteroleptals with the rifle is one of the funniest little moments in the entire show, as it is so unnecessary and she could have just shot it. May I also mention that this part of the story has one thing that most fans unconsciously don't realise about the classic show, and that is, this is a rare moment with atmospheric lighting. The green glow as well as the red illuminating from the fire looks so good on Blu-ray, and I do find it refreshing after seeing constant bright sets. Since the Doctor dropped his torch, and it came into contact with the soliton gas, and that's what causes the explosion, we end up getting to see one of the darkest shots in the entire classic show, being the bubbling face of the Pteroleptal leader as it screams in pain as it dies. Soon after disposing the materials from the Pteroleptals, the TARDIS team quickly bid farewell to Mace as he's the first responder to stop the fire. This story ends with the TARDIS team flying away, confused why the Doctor didn't stop the fire, because he just interfered and started the Great Fire of London of 1666 in Pudding Lane for the concluding shot of this story. Now, The Visitation is a strange story to look from in a critical level, as it has many pros and cons. Starting with pros, obviously the story looks amazing on film, and the lighting and the setting makes up for it, as it has been a long time since it has been historical. But for cons, the story is poorly paced, and most of the fun stuff is squashed into part 4, making the rest of it seem useless and boring. When looking at our main villains, the pteroleptals, I will say that they have a great costume, and the moving mouth is pretty advanced, but the boring voices and the stiff movement ruin that illusion. Their motivation is also weak, as they really don't have one, and they just want to be the rulers of Earth, and it is so played out and repetitive. It just doesn't work for a story like this. For a supporting character, Richard Mace is memorable, but is overall useless as well, because he doesn't really add anything to the plot except exposition, and he is quite bland. And I wish he had a bit more of a rogue aspect to him, as he's a highwayman after all. And I also wish he had a similar role that Sabalom Glitz had in his 2 stories in the late 80s. The Doctor is fine in this one. He has no real amazing lines, and it could be misinterpreted that this was Peter Davison's first story made, as he doesn't seem that comfortable in the role. Tegan doesn't get to do much besides getting captured and mind-controlled, and Nyssa does quite a lot before she gets demoted to building the sonic booster in the TARDIS. But the actual lowlight is Adric, as he is really useless in the story. He does literally nothing throughout, and even when he saves the day by rescuing everyone in the TARDIS, he has Nyssa there to support him as he bangs on the TARDIS console. But he is just so clumsy in this story. Obviously, him falling over nothing is so comically stupid, you could actually see it as a joke. But then he just gets knocked out for 2 fights in the worst possible ways. I don't know why he's so bad in this story, but what I can presume is that the production staff are ready to get rid of him, which ends up happening very soon. When looking at the big picture of the story, it is a downgrade from the previous 2, and it is quite a shame, as it looks really good and has some interesting ideas, but it's just so average, and it doesn't offend me or isn't a slog to watch. That's why I'm going to give The Visitation a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching.